to burglar proof or not to burglar proof? This has to be one of the toughest decisions that builders are faced with. The decision whether or not to make these bars which feels like prison to them. In this video, I'll be sharing with you some of the important considerations that people make when choosing to do burglar bars, and then also I'll share with you some conditions under which you don't have to do burglar bars, or ways that you may use to avoid using burglar bars, or having a good balance when you have to reluctantly choose to use burglar bars. Now, the topmost reason why people would go for burglar bars is obvious: safety. So we have to answer the big question in the room right now, and that is Ghana a safe place to be? Maybe particularly let's focus on Accra. Is Accra a safe place to be? And the short answer to you is yes. I've been to a couple of cities, and there are only a handful of places where you can actually say they are really safer than Accra in terms of areas where it's walkable and safe to do that in the night. Of course, you have to take the necessary precautions and not flash around interesting things that would attract people. But Ghana is by and large really, really safe in my opinion. Are there crimes? Are there occasional robberies? Absolutely, yes. And I think one of the biggest deterrents to petty crimes is to have burglar bars, which is why lots of people are now going for that. I would say the relatively popular usage of burglar bars does not really match the level of crime when I compare that to other places in other cities I've been where the severity of crime is really high. And that also throws in the other thing. In Ghana, I think the primary benefit of burglar bars is to prevent petty crimes and petty robbery. Now, there are different circumstances under which you may decide to go with burglar bars or not. So let's look at them. The first one is location. Location matters a lot. There are certain areas where the crime rates and the incidence of robbery, whether petty or severe, is really high. And so in those areas, you obviously want to elevate your security. The next consideration is the usage of your property. If your property is built in the city center for rental, short stay purposes, you obviously want to consider the safety of your clients and or the perceived safety, and in order to do that, you may decide to introduce these burglar bars to ensure that your clients come in and go out in one piece. However, if your property is on the outskirts or is a holiday home in some place like Ebri or Akosombo, for instance, you probably want to tone down on using burglar bars because those places report near zero incidents and there is a really low chance of such crimes. And typically people would only come to those areas when they are on holiday, so there is a low likelihood of such crimes happening. The next consideration is the type of community you're building. If your building is a freestanding building, then it stands alone and may need a slightly elevated security protocol than, say, if you have your building in a gated community that already has a perimeter wall and maybe 24-hour security. So that may influence your decision on whether or not to go with burglar bars. So the community you find your building in is really important. The next consideration is the type of building, right? If your building is a story building, for instance, you may decide to only do the burglar bars on the ground floor, or maybe on the first floor and the ground floor, and then the rest of the floors can be left entirely untouched. And also the other considerations that you want to make is what are the other security protocols you have. Say if you have a fence wall with electric fencing, then you might want to consider not putting burglar bars. That might be excessive depending on, again, the location and the community and the usage pattern you are looking at. But you don't always have to, put in layers and layers of security unless you really want to build a fortress for some reason. There is also another tiny or little consideration that forces people's hands in terms of choosing burglar bars, and that is electrical wire theft. Now, as you would know, it is a common thing that electrical wiring may get stolen, especially in certain popular places when it is laid out whilst the building construction is still going on. And so the natural order for a lot of people to prevent this is to set up their burglar proof before they actually put in these electrical wires. And so that leads to a setup where you have to have your burglar proof in place. Now, as we always do, we share our experience and our decision. And when it came down to ours, we decided to put burglar proof. I have to share that doing all these security measures for us was not the basis for feeling more secure personally. We as Christians, we know that our real security and peace comes in Christ and from Christ. And so that is what we actually live by. This was more to do with the facility, how it might be used, the people who would use it, and how they will feel about it. So it's more important to us to ensure that this facility is on par with equivalent buildings and structures in its environs. Now, when you put all this together and you finally decide that you would do some level of burglar proof or burglar bar somewhere in your building, then it's very important to ensure that you choose a design that you like, something that makes it feel a little bit natural for you. And natural is subject to your own interpretation, and it has to be something that you like. So as you can see on the screen, we have a couple of design ideas we looked through. So you can go on Pinterest, you can find different design options, work through them, look at how they look. We have pretty good local fabricators and they can look at these designs and easily produce them. So we're actually playing with a lot of these designs, and it's quite interesting because we settled for a really simple design due to some demonstration of someone's house that we saw on YouTube, and the windows look like this. So having gone through many of the designs, I think whilst we were inching towards choosing some of them, we concluded that they were too busy for the eye, and we didn't want too much busyness with the designs and the aesthetics. So again, looking at this one that we saw on YouTube, it might be hard to explain, but I liked it, right? The spaces were big, the rods were thin. It didn't give the perception of, prison bars. There are some that actually look like real prison bars. And this also aesthetically nice because the windows are also pretty big, right? So this is something that we looked at and we're like, yeah, maybe we should go with a simple design. And so we iterated through a couple of designs and settled on what you see. Initially we had this was made by a fabricator, and we're like, no, we want something which is more like square shaped, more open and thinner rods and stuff. So then after a couple of iterations, we settled on something that looks like this, which was later sprayed as white, and you see that displayed in the screen. So yeah, this was something that we settled on when we thought was a good balance aesthetically, not too busy, but also in terms of utility, it wasn't too prison-like, at least as best as we could interpret it. And again, this is for people who would use it and to make them feel at home and to sleep comfortably if you like. I have to state at this point that there are actually other options to outright burglar bars like this. There are those wire mesh which are really strong and can do a good job at preventing petty crimes, like really hard to cut through, and they provide a very good safety barrier for people. So if you prefer to have those options, you might want to see if it's possible to locally manufacture that, but you can certainly source those outside in China and so on and so forth. So those options are also very much available for those who don't like to see any form of bars, right? And yet want some screen or some level of security against petty crimes. The final piece in this video is, as we normally do, the cost involved in achieving this. And we are talking about 32 windows, and we are talking about the big retractable windows you can see at the front, and all of that with making sure it is painted or sprayed, workmanship and all of that costs roughly 24,000 cedis. So when you see the conversion or the exchange rate at the time on your screen, check out our previous videos where we share the cost breakdown for putting up the structure and also the cost breakdown for each of the different finishing components, which together actually cost a lot more than putting up the structure, to give you an overall idea of what this will cost you. But this is where we end with burglar proofs, and I hope that this helps you make your decision on whether to burglar proof or not to burglar proof. Bye. Subscribe, like this, share your comments, let me know how your experience has been or your decision is, and we'll meet in our next video next week.